Many kids in San Diego began school on August 31st, and on September 1st, the directors had our regular staff meeting. Some of the staff were plunged into that dynamic of trying to work full-time while tending to their kids' schooling needs at home, their computer needs and internet bandwidth and all sorts of things. It was not easy. It is not easy. I know that there are so many of you who are in that same dynamic. I'm long past helping children with their homework, but I still remember that energy that came in the fall when we knew school was about to begin. Do you remember that? For our devotion on that director's meeting on that September 1st, I invited everyone to remember their first days of school. Some of the staff said they remembered a sense of being scared and excited all at once. Some said they remembered feeling as though they were entering into a whole new world. Some said they remembered loving to see old friends and to begin to discover new friends. Someone said they remembered trapper keepers. I had to add that in my day it was peachy folders. As I watched the staff in their little square homes on our Zoom call, I began to see them as they shared their memories. I saw their faces brighten, their eyes begin to sparkle as they got lost in the memories of learning new things and exploring new worlds. I loved school, from kindergarten on up through graduate school. I loved it. Mrs. Yarnell, my kindergarten teacher, she taught me the difference between home and school with her gentle but firm reminder that I could not interrupt her during story time. I could not be talking to my neighbors. It was time to be quiet and listen, a very important lesson. I remember Mrs. Tanaka in third grade, I think it was, and the thing I remember most about her was teaching a social studies segment on the Polynesian culture, and somehow she was able to get the school custodian to dig a hole out in the outfield of our campus so that we could roast a pig and have a true Polynesian luau. I remember Mr. Eason in high school would share his slides of all his international travels that supplemented his teaching on world history. I remember Dr. Riley in seminary, who placed the New Testament in the context of the Greco-Roman world, or Dr. Cabazon, who placed Christianity alongside other faith traditions. That's what education does, isn't it? It expands our world. It expands our world for us beyond our own homes, our own cultures, our own nations, our own faith traditions. Oh, there are other forms of education as well, outside of the formal classroom. My father taught me how to hammer a nail in his garage. My mom taught me how to sew on a button at the dining room table. My piano teacher taught me how to play scales on her grand piano. And my basketball coach taught me how to do a layup on the court. We call this an education of life lessons, although don't ask me when the last time was that I actually did a layup. We'll call that one simply a lesson in strategy. And then there's the education I got from my friends who taught me how to be a friend, to know exactly how far to go with teasing or how to trust somebody and have them trust me with their secrets. There's the education I got from my mentors, you know, the mentors who teach you how to navigate a new career or a new job, and taught you the important lesson that it's not exactly that you do the job, but how you do the job. There's the education we get from our family on how to manage conflict, emotions, relationships, love. This is the kind of education that shapes our character. I wonder if the ancient people of God had that same sense of excitement when they began to notice that the days were getting shorter and the weather cooler, because that would have meant that Rosh Hashanah was coming, the Jewish New Year, and that would usher in a whole new year of learning. Back in antiquity, the lessons of faith were taught through storytelling, the oral tradition. I can imagine a storyteller talking to the children about God hovering over the chaos and speaking a word. And they would know that story so well that by the time the storyteller got to the place, then the children would all say together, "And it was good, and it was good," until finally it was very good. During Purim, the story of Esther was told. I can imagine them talking about Mordecai. And maybe when it came to the part in that story, they all said together, "For such a time as this." It was during Shavuot that the story of Ruth was told, and maybe the kids would say together, "Where you go, I go." And during Passover, it was the whole Exodus story. So I can just hear the kids saying, "God has heard our cry," or whispering, "I am who I am," or shouting along with Moses, "Let my people go." This is the education that expands our world to the place where we include God and the impossible. There were a couple of teachers from whom I struggled to learn. Mr. Hudson simply used a bright red marker all over my English paper, and the chicken scratch was such that I could barely read it, much less understand how he was telling me to fix it. Or the coach on my softball team who just intimidated so much with her desire to win that the first ball hit my way, I let go past me, and she yanked me to the bench. Or Miss Stalwart, who gave us the assignment of creating a journal, but she didn't mean the Dear Diary kind of journal. What she really meant was a series of analytical essays, and I should have really known because this was graduate school, but it was my first semester. It's embarrassing, you know? It's embarrassing, and I don't think we can learn when we're embarrassed or when we aren't given much of a chance, or when there's different assumptions around the place from which we begin. Some lessons are just hard to learn. What we see in Psalm 78 is the story of all that God has done for the people of faith. But Psalm 78 was meant to remind the people because they had forgotten. The lessons that they had once learned had slipped from their minds, and so they needed to hear the lessons again. Sometimes I think we think that we've learned it all, and so we stop learning. My dad wanted me to teach him how to use the computer in his 90s. I was not a very good teacher. I'm not sure who was more impatient, he or I. It didn't go well. I get it. I understand. I remember when my nephew was trying to teach me how to play a computer game, and there were shortcuts in the way you used the keyboard and typing out phrases. I shouldn't be surprised by those shortcuts. Google thinks I know what I'm going to say before I actually type it in, and Siri will automatically fill in the words as if they know. But you know, that is not the way I learned how to type. And my goodness, there were no shortcuts. We used all 10 fingers in my typing classes, and that was a perfectly fine way to do it, doggone it. And why do we need to change? That was the right way. Most of our resistance to learn comes from that kind of anxiety, isn't it? The anxiety that comes when things are changing all around us. This school year is different. It's different. And that's not the only change that we see happening all around us. There are changes that we are currently going through that are causing us to learn new ways of being, inviting us to understand others differently, and demanding that the world needs to change and be better. That's a lot of change. But these changes are not very unlike the changes that came before Esther or Ruth or the people of the Exodus. In fact, throughout our Bible, there are stories of people encountering exactly these kinds of changes, the changes that ask a lot of us, from Jonah in Nineveh to the exiles in Babylon, from the lepers and the tax collectors and the disciples that Jesus called to follow him, to the scribes and the Pharisees that Jesus tried to teach. Change is constant. And if the Bible teaches us anything, it teaches us that God can be trusted. God can be trusted in all of the change throughout all of time. From the very beginning, God's Spirit hovers over the chaos and does not leave until all things are new and all can say together, "It is good, very good. I have heard the cries of my people. God is who God is for just such a time as this." I learned about the love of God from my youth group counselors. I learned about God's presence and power from Reverend Paula. I learned how to see holiness in some of the most ordinary things from Dr. Doyle. And Dr. Bentley taught me how to trust God. One of our staff members remembered needing a little push on her first day of school. The fear overwhelmed the excitement. Another of our staff members remembered the preparations for school. For her, it meant that her mother and she would go to the fabric store and pick out patterns and material for her mother to make her a new clothes set, a whole new wardrobe for school, so that on her first day and the days that followed, she was literally clothed with her mother's love. And others of our staff members who have children learning to learn from home, help them create their own workspace in their home, because they remembered how fun it was to supply and to arrange their own desks. And I saw the evidence that many of you took that traditional first day of school photograph and posted it on Facebook. Things are different, but it's going to be okay. Do you remember your first day of school? Do you remember all that you have learned about God? I wish I could see you. I wish I could see you even in maybe those little squares of the Zoom call, and maybe I would see your faces start to brighten and your eyes begin to sparkle as you get lost in the memory of all that God has done. Maybe then I would know that you trust God. Maybe then I would know that you won't be worrying. I pray, wherever you are, you have found that trust and that you feel the energy in the air. May it be so. Amen.